They deported me 3 times, but my grandchildren made me come back anyway. When Teresa Ramirez first set foot on the dry, dusty soil of southern Arizona, she had no idea she would spend the next 30 years living as a shadow. Her feet were cracked from the trek, her lips chapped from the sun, and there was a faith in her bones that did not break, even when she heard shots near the group she was crossing with. Her heart pounded, not out of fear, but out of determination. Teresa had one mission: to lift her family out of the cycle of poverty that had plagued generations in San Miguel, El Salvador. If you enjoy interesting stories, give this a like, subscribe to our channel, ring the notification bell so you don't miss any of our content, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. She was 32 years old, mother to 2 small children, Marta and Julio, and held inside her a silent ache only mothers who leave their children behind can understand. She'd promised she would return soon, bringing enough money to build a real house, with cement walls, not tin, and a bed for each child. She told them the Virgin would watch over them, that their Aunt Maribel would cook for them, and that before long they'd be together again. But in her heart, she knew that before long could stretch out like an open wound. She entered the United States without documents, hidden in the back of a battered pickup truck, along with 3 other women and 2 teenagers who cried quietly. The coyotes had promised a safe route, but safety was a luxury that didn't exist for those who crossed without permission. Teresa didn't cry. She allowed herself no tears. Along the way, a young woman fainted from dehydration. Another threw up constantly. Teresa shared her water without hesitation, fully aware it wouldn't be enough for herself. In the desert, there was no mercy, but she wasn't like the others. When she arrived in Los Angeles, the first thing she noticed was the noise. Cars everywhere, lights that never went out, words she didn't understand. The English language hit her like a wall. Yet she refused to be intimidated. She rented a room in a house in Inglewood, shared with 4 other Salvadoran women who, like her, lived off hope. She slept on a mat she rolled up each morning so the area could function as a living room. She kept her clothes in an old suitcase. She had no privacy, no personal space, no right to be tired. During her first few months, she worked cleaning houses. Later, through a co-worker, she found a job as a caregiver for a 90-year-old woman who was bedridden and had no nearby family. Teresa learned how to change diapers, give medication, and calm anxiety attacks without really speaking the language. She used body language, gestures, and a quiet kindness that needed no translation. Soon, the agency that hired her began calling her frequently. She was always available, never complained, never arrived late. With what little she earned, she sent money to San Miguel every month, sometimes only $20, other times up to $100. Every cent cost her physically, but it mattered more that her children had new shoes than that she ate a decent meal. She survived on the basics: rice, beans, stale bread. In winter, she slept with her coat on to avoid turning on the heat. In summer, she showered in cold water to save gas. She lived convinced that all the sacrifice was temporary. Though the years would prove otherwise, she rarely spoke about herself. The places where she worked knew her for her neatness. Patients called her Miss Terra, or simply her. She had no documents, no voice, no rights, but she had a purpose. She was invisible to the system, yet essential to the families who relied on her. Sometimes, walking home, she passed parks where small children played. She'd pause for a few seconds to watch, thinking of Marta and Julio. She wondered if they still remembered her, if they still cared. She never told them how she suffered. In the letters she sent, she only wrote uplifting things, that she was fine, that she worked hard, that she loved them. She never mentioned the constant fear of being caught, or the anguish of living hidden, or the loneliness she felt on Sunday nights. Years went by. Marta and Julio grew up without her, but they held on to hope. Teresa never stopped working, not a single day. With each person she cared for, each elderly patient she fed or comforted, she poured pieces of her soul into them, because although her body was in Los Angeles, her heart remained in San Miguel. She wasn't the kind of woman who drew attention. She didn't wear makeup, didn't dress boldly, didn't talk loudly. But anyone who looked closely into her eyes saw something different there, an ancient strength found in women who carry entire families on their shoulders without expecting acknowledgement. And though she never said it aloud, within her she repeated the same promise. One day we will all be together again. That day seemed far off, but Teresa was ready to wait, fight, and endure whatever it took, because to her, love for her family mattered more than any border. Teresa Ramirez never imagined that after so many quiet years of struggle, she'd find a brand new reason to keep going: her grandchildren. It was 2006 when Marta and Julio, her children, finally settled legally in Los Angeles. The reunification wasn't fast or easy, but when they finally met again, their hug at the bus station was so long and tight that onlookers assumed it was a goodbye, not a reunion. Teresa never cried in public, but that afternoon she broke down in front of them, kissing their foreheads as though they were still little, touching their faces over and over, refusing to believe they had all survived in their own ways, the distance, the absence, and the passage of time. They lived in a small rented house with 2 bedrooms, a narrow kitchen, and a makeshift living room that turned into a bedroom each night. Teresa didn't complain. She slept on a sofa that squeaked any time she moved, sometimes with a granddaughter beside her, sometimes alone, but never in loneliness again. Sofia was the first to call her Mama Teresa. She was only 4, bursting with energy. One day, while Teresa braided her hair for preschool, the girl told her matter-of-factly, "You take care of me like my mom does, but gentler. You're my Mama Teresa." And so it stayed. Over time, that name became the household norm. Mateo, Camila, Andres, Luisito, and Valeria arrived afterward, one after the other, blessings swaddled in diapers and midnight crying. Each found in Teresa not just a grandmother, but a stable, constant, and loving presence who gave them far more than day-to-day care. She gave them peace. Teresa kept the household running like clockwork. She rose before 6, cooked breakfast with handmade tortillas, pot coffee, and refried beans. While the parents readied for work, she dressed the children, hunted for missing shoes, packed backpacks, wiped runny noses, and checked homework. Then she walked them to school, hand in hand, singing old songs from her homeland. She never complained, not even when her hip or knee hurt. After midday, she came home to cook with extra care: chicken and rice, chicken soup, pupusas on Sundays. There was always a hot meal waiting. She washed laundry, picked up scattered toys, swept every corner. When the kids returned from school, Teresa stood at the door, arms open, as if they were heroes returning from battle. At night, she told them stories. No fairy tales, but anecdotes from her childhood. Stories of San Miguel, climbing trees in search of mangoes, or selling bread in a basket to help her own mother. The children listened, entranced. Within those stories, they found their roots, an identity not written on any document, but carved into them just the same. Yet in the midst of so much devotion, Teresa still had no rights. She was the one who loved them most, who cared for them the most, who silently held that family up like a pillar, but she couldn't sign anything, couldn't take her grandchildren to the doctor without permission, couldn't drive, not even get a library card in her own name. She lived in fear. Every siren made her tremble. If someone knocked unexpectedly, she froze, as if time itself stopped. She avoided going out alone, never took public transport, and walked with the caution of someone who knows a single misstep could cost her everything. Despite the unrelenting fear, Teresa felt happy because for the first time in so many years, she had a home filled with laughter, with small feet running through hallways, with children's drawings pinned to the walls, with little hands grasping hers as if she were the safest place on earth. She needed no recognition or praise, seeing her grandchildren sleep peacefully, hugging stuffed toys she had mended with needle and thread, hearing them shout, "Mama Teresa," when they came home. That was worth more than any document. One afternoon, folding laundry in the bedroom, Sophia asked her, "Are you from here or from there?" Teresa stroked her hair and answered gently, "I'm from wherever you all are. If you're here, then I'm here too." That phrase stuck with the girl. Although none of them knew it yet, a day would come when those words would be more than a memory. They would become a rallying cry, an act of defiance, and the very reason they would fight for something that seemed impossible. Because while Teresa had no papers, no work permit, and no health insurance, she had something stronger, the unconditional love of 6 little hearts who didn't see her as an immigrant, but as home. It happened on an otherwise ordinary morning, the sort where the sun felt softer and the children said goodbye with giggles. Teresa was taking Matteo, her oldest grandson, 8 years old, for a routine medical checkup. He had mild asthma that required follow-up. As in other instances, Marta couldn't skip work, placing her full trust in her mother's capable hands, just as always. They caught the bus right at 8, with the boy's backpack ready and his health insurance documents in a blue folder. Teresa felt calm, but still carried that old tension in her chest. It wasn't her first time going to a doctor's office, but something that day would be different, something no one could anticipate. They reached the community health center in El Monte, signed in at the front desk, and sat down to wait. Matteo fiddled with a small toy car. Teresa softly hummed a Salvadoran melody to keep him relaxed. Then 2 men in dark uniforms came in. They bore no visible weapons, but their badges identified them as immigration agents. Teresa felt an icy chill along her back. She made no sudden moves, lowered her gaze, tried not to attract attention. It was no use. One of them walked straight to her with a neutral, unaggressive yet firm expression. "Are you Mrs. Teresa Ramirez?" he asked bluntly. She froze for a moment, then quietly confirmed, "Yes." "May I see your ID, please?" Her world collapsed right then. She had no US ID, no papers, only the folder containing the boy's documents, none of which had her name. She tried explaining she was just the grandmother, just accompanying him. She hadn't done anything wrong. The agents didn't cuff her in front of Matteo, but they did ask her to step outside to clarify the situation. Teresa begged to call her daughter, but they refused. They only said everything would be fine, that the boy would be brought home by social services. Matteo, confused, started crying when his grandma didn't come back from the hallway. A medical assistant had to hold him, telling him his mom would come soon, but Teresa was gone. They took her to a detention center in San Bernardino, a cold facility without windows or clocks, where time had no meaning. She was processed as an illegal with no valid papers. While she had no criminal record or fines or complaints, her being in the country was a federal offense. In the first few days, she didn't understand what the officers were saying. They gave her a grey uniform, took her belongings, assigned her a metal bunk in a shared cell. She could hardly sleep. Fear clung to her body like sweat. She thought about her grandchildren. Had they eaten? Would Marta explain what happened? Was Sophia crying because she never came home that day? 11 days passed with no family contact. Finally, a legal aid called Marta, explaining there wasn't much that could be done. The system moved faster than compassion. Before they could gather evidence or submit a formal request, Teresa was deported quietly, without a hearing, with no opportunity to defend herself. The plane landed in El Salvador on a Friday afternoon. Teresa stepped off with shaking hands, no suitcase, no place to go. just a plastic bag holding her removal papers. She was back in the country she'd fled nearly 20 years before, back without her children, her grandchildren, without anything. In Los Angeles, the impact was devastating. Marta locked herself in her room for 2 whole days. Julio punched a wall in frustration, yet the ones who suffered most were the kids. Sofia slept clutching her grandmother's blouse, refusing to let it be washed. Camila cried at night, asking if Mama Teresa was mad at her. Mateo, who witnessed everything, went silent for a full week. The house felt empty. The food lost its savor. Nobody could braid hair like she did or fold laundry with such care. Chores piled up, daily rhythms broke down. Teresa's absence was a black hole sucking away the warmth of their home. For Teresa, the worst wasn't being deported, but not being able to say goodbye, not telling them she loved them, not hugging them one last time. From a borrowed room in San Miguel, exhausted and heartbroken, she thought only of one thing. I have to go back. Somehow, I must go back. The room where Teresa Ramirez awoke each morning in San Miguel had walls stained with damp, a rickety bed that squeaked whenever she sat, and a small fan that barely spun. Weeks had passed since her deportation, yet she still felt that emptiness in her bones. She was in her homeland, yes, but everything felt strange. The neighborhood of her youth was different, dirtier, more closed off. The few acquaintances she had barely greeted her, as if her return brought them shame. She stayed at a cousin's home, in a back room by a ravine. Its roof leaked, so during rainy nights, Teresa dragged her bed aside to avoid drips. She sometimes went an entire day without eating. Other times, she ate only stale bread and black coffee. But the worst wasn't hunger. It was the silence. She'd sometimes spend hours on a plastic chair, staring blankly, thinking of her grandchildren, recalling their small hands, their voices calling her Mama Teresa. She wondered if they'd forget her, if Camila still slept hugging her old blouse, if Sofia kept styling Valeria's hair the way Teresa taught. Just picturing their sad little faces broke her heart. Sadness began making her sick. A persistent cough that wouldn't go away, constant fatigue, muscle pains, chills. She could hardly walk, her legs swollen, her chest sore. At the public hospital, she was diagnosed with a respiratory infection, anemia, and low blood pressure. She received prescriptions for vitamins and antibiotics she couldn't afford. Even so, when asked how she was, she forced a faint smile. "I'm fine. I just miss the air over there." Inside, though, she was falling apart. She sometimes talked to herself. She'd get up at dawn, light a candle, murmur prayers that blurred with sobs. Each prayer ended the same way: "I'm coming back. Even if I have to crawl, I'm coming back. Nobody takes from me what's mine." That phrase became her shield, her only defense against despair. In March 2013, she got a call from Julio. He put Sofia on the line, and the moment her granddaughter heard Teresa's voice, the girl burst into tears. "Grandma, when will you come?" "Nobody tells me stories like you." Mateo won't laugh. "Mummy doesn't sing anymore." That's when Teresa made up her mind. She found a man who arranged undocumented crossings. Not cheap, not safe, but the only option. She sold what little she had left. An old watch, her mother's ring, a pair of gold earrings stored away for years. She used that money to pay part of it. Marta and Julio covered the rest from the US. She left with a group of 8, a pregnant Honduran teenager, a weary older man, 2 quiet young men, a mother with her 5-year-old daughter, and a Salvadoran youth deported 3 times. Teresa was the oldest at 63, physically frail, but she never complained or asked for special treatment, only that they not leave her behind. They moved slowly through Guatemala amid long waits and uneasy silences. In Mexico, they were locked in a grimy warehouse in Chiapas for days, surrounded by rats, roaches, stench. Their meals were cold beans, sleeping on the floor. One of the young men got a fever. Teresa shared her last acetaminophen pills with him. Then came the beast, the train route, hiding between cars, wrapped in old blankets. Some cried, others prayed, Teresa focusing on her grandkids' faces. Each jolt of the train, each sudden lurch, threatened to fling her heart out of her chest. In Sonora, the group was told they'd walk across the desert for 4 days. Daytime temperatures could reach 100+ Fahrenheit, dropping below freezing at night. They were given water in reused bottles, a bit of bread, 2 packets of rehydration salts. That was it. They marched for hours under the scorching sun. Teresa could barely lift her feet. Her walking stick broke on the second day. Her shoes tore open, feet bleeding. Every step was torture. She had to stop repeatedly. One of the younger men carried her on his back for a while. She didn't want him to, but she lacked the strength to continue alone. One night, near collapse, she dropped to her knees in the sand. She couldn't go further. The guide yelled at her to get up. Coyotes didn't wait. "Get up or you stay!" "I can't," she shouted in tears and dust. "Then you'll die here." But Teresa dragged herself forward, slowly, using elbows and bloody knees, thinking only of Sophia, imagining the girl's face, her voice. 3 days later, they reached a house outside Tucson, hidden for 2 more days, then loaded into the back of a specially outfitted pickup, covered by blankets and empty boxes. Finally, crossing the last checkpoint, she could scarcely breathe. They dropped her off at an empty lot in East El. A Julio picked her up at dawn. Seeing her, hair disheveled, skin sallow, eyes dulled, he cried, "Mama, what did you do?" "I came back," she whispered, barely audible. That morning, when the children saw her walk through the door, they all screamed at once, raced to hug her, clung to her arms, neck, legs, weeping, shouting her name, kissing her. For them, it was a miracle, and in some sense, it was. 2016 began with a deceptive calm. Teresa no longer moved as spryly, but remained active, caring for the grandkids, making meals, picking them up from school, knitting scarves for chilly evenings. Though physically weak, her heart clung to that home as if she refused to lose the last thread of life left. Since her clandestine return in 2013, she lived extremely cautiously, not going out alone, avoiding public transport, always aware that her presence here was more precarious than ever, but her love for her family kept her going. She knew everything could change at any moment, and it did. It was an ordinary Sunday morning. Teresa went each week to a small church in East El, not just for faith but for comfort and hope. That morning she wore a blue jacket, carrying a bag of candy to hand out to the children after Mass. She left the church smiling, exchanging greetings with neighborhood women. She'd barely walked half a block when 2 unmarked vans pulled up. 4 agents got out quickly, none of them visibly armed, but their serious faces carried authority. One spoke her name, Teresa Ramirez. Date of birth, March 14th, 1961. She froze. Her bag fell to the ground. She didn't try to run or speak, only lowered her head. "You have an active warrant for illegal re-entry after deportation," said one of the officers, handcuffing her. Someone had filed an anonymous tip. Nobody ever found out who or why. Maybe a neighbor, maybe a spiteful person, maybe pure bad luck. But Teresa's name was now flagged. And this time, the system would treat her not just as an undocumented immigrant, but as a repeat offender, a top priority for ICE. They took her to a detention center in Adelantos, California. Conditions far harsher than those in her first deportation. Overcrowded cells, constant lighting day and night, extreme cold from the air conditioning, half-cooked food. There was no privacy. The staff barked orders in English as if they were dealing with dangerous criminals. Teresa, now 68, could barely move without help. Her cough returned. Her legs ached with each step. She struggled to breathe. Days dragged by in freezing air, poor food and dread, no one answering her questions, no one explaining her fate. Meanwhile, in L.A., The news struck like a bomb. Julio got a call from an unknown number. A center employee said Teresa was in federal custody, soon to be deported. When? Where? Is she okay? I'm sorry, sir, the employee replied. I can't share more. I'm calling as a courtesy. The family sprang into action, hiring an immigration lawyer again, preparing documents, letters, community backing. This time, the process moved faster and crueler. Ms. Ramirez re-entered illegally after a formal deportation, said the judge in a brief hearing. The system doesn't allow exceptions for that. Teresa listened with her head bowed, neither arguing nor crying. She had no energy left to fight. She was deported within a week, now with an official label in her file, repeat offender. In immigration terms, that was basically a life sentence, shutting every door. She was, in the government's view, a threat. Landing again in El Salvador, she was no longer the same woman. She walked slowly, spoke less. Her eyes were dry, as if she had no tears left. A nephew she barely knew picked her up. She weighed 30 pounds less, had deep circles under her eyes, bruises on her wrists, and a persistent cough. And now, Aunt? The nephew asked, helping her inside his home. Now I breathe and wait, she rasped. Yet neither fear nor sickness quenched that inner fire. Staying in her nephew's house, sleeping on a makeshift bed near the window, she spent nights staring at the sky. She pictured Valeria, likely walking now. Camilla, likely learning to write her own name. Sophia, who alone seemed to grasp the weight of silence. She repeated to herself, I don't know how, I don't know when, but I am going back, because no border law or repeat offender label could change how she felt. Her place was there, where 6 kids still slept, clutching her old photo as if it could freeze time. If you're enjoying this story, give it a like, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our content. By 2017, the news was all about detentions, raids, deportations. With Donald Trump's arrival in office, the crackdown on undocumented immigrants became official state policy. New executive orders ended protections, cancelled relief programs, and gave federal agencies free rein to use extreme severity. For Teresa, watching from a dusty corner of San Miguel, the images broadcast on TV, it felt personal, a direct threat. Re-entries like hers were now ICE's top priority. Each time a case like hers appeared in media, they talked of criminals, danger, system fraud. No mention of the word grandma. The harsher the climate got, the stronger Teresa's longing grew. Illness still wore her down, constant cough, painful bones, occasional blurred vision. But each day she spent away from her grandkids was a day she wouldn't get back. She no longer thought in years, but in months, weeks, sometimes days. If I die, she told herself, let it be with them. If I fall, let it be near their voices. In January 2018, she made her final decision, no turning back. She contacted a different clandestine network than before, more organized but riskier. Costs had doubled, routes had tightened, dangers multiplied. She never hesitated. She sold any last valuables, inherited land, her mother's wedding ring, a small sewing machine. Marta and Julio wired the rest. They knew that trying to stop her was pointless. This time there'd be no desert trek. Her body couldn't handle that. Instead, she'd be crammed into a specially modified vehicle for human smuggling, an automobile with hidden compartments and tinted windows. Teresa would lie still, voiceless, with no direct airflow, armed only with a small water bottle, some pills, and a photo of her grandchildren. Before leaving, she wrote a letter to each grandkid. She didn't know if she'd make it or survive, but she wanted them to know that no matter what, she never abandoned them, that she fought until her last breath to come back. On the night of the crossing, everything was silent. In a warehouse north of Hermosillo, they sealed her into the hidden compartment of a black sedan. Two young men carefully concealed the entrance. One whispered, "If you feel you can't breathe, don't move. It'll just be 3 hours if all goes well." No time for goodbyes or prayers. The car started off, curled into fetal position. She saw nothing, only hearing the engine and her pounding heart. She soon lost track of time. The heat was unbearable. Sweat drenched her. She wanted to scream but didn't. She thought she might die but clung to a single image. Sophia as a little girl, petting her hair at bedtime. At the first checkpoint, the driver displayed forged documents. An official peeked into the trunk, looked through the windows, asked routine questions, then let them pass. Teresa held her breath, knowing a single noise, a single stray movement, could end it all. 2 hours later, they arrived at a house on the U.S. side, outside Yuma, Arizona. They pulled her from the hidden compartment. She was dehydrated, pale, so weak she couldn't stand, vomiting on contact with fresh air, crying not from pain but relief. "You did it, ma'am," one of the men said, helping her up. "Rest now, you're across." She spent 3 days there recovering, served soup, medicine, a change of clothes. On the 4th day, she was driven to Los Angeles, where Julio waited anxiously. Seeing her exit the vehicle, hair disheveled, face drawn, eyes lifeless, he felt mingled terror and awe. "Mama, why?" he asked. "Broken? Because you need me, and I need you more," Teresa answered weakly. That night, she was back home. The kids squealed with joy, rushing at her like it was Christmas. Sophia, now a teen, became a child again, wanting stories and endless hugs. Mateo, taller and more reserved, squeezed her hand and wouldn't let go. Valeria, the youngest, clung to her the entire evening. Teresa slept on the same old sofa with a blanket Camilla had knit. She lived in new fear, being caught again in a country more hostile than ever, but also in a peace only love can offer. If the world outside was colder, inside that home there was still warmth. And though she was weak, Teresa was ready to defend that warmth with her life. The peace Teresa found after her 3rd crossing was short-lived. Barely a year had passed since her return when everything collapsed brutally. In March 2019, Teresa traveled with an acquaintance to Texas to visit an ailing aunt. It was meant to be a short trip, an exception to her routine of caring for the family and rarely venturing out. She dreaded traveling beyond her area, aware her presence here was more fragile than ever. But she went, trusting it would be safe. It wasn't. A highway checkpoint near El Paso flagged their car. Officials requested documents, asked names. Teresa had none. When they asked her to step out, her body shook. She knew exactly what was coming. She didn't resist, bowed her head, laced her fingers together, and climbed into the ice van as though performing a grim ritual she knew too well, but found more painful each time. They took her to a detention center in western Texas, a repurposed facility for hundreds of women caught in mass raids. Miserable conditions, no privacy, thin mattresses, brownish water, lights on all night. Guards shouted orders in English. They treated detainees like hardened criminals. Teresa, now 68, could scarcely move on her own. Her cough got worse. Bones hurt with every step. She had trouble breathing. The days dragged on in the cold, among hunger and terror. No answers to her questions, no explanation. Back in LA, the news dropped like a bomb. Julio got a call from a random number. A female staffer from the center said Teresa was in federal custody and would soon be deported. When? Where is she? Is she okay? "I'm sorry, sir," she said. "I can't give details, just letting you know as a courtesy." The family reacted at once, calling an immigration attorney, prepping documents, again. But the system's response was always, "She's a repeat offender. This is a priority deportation." Nothing to be done. The children sensed it, the sadness in the air, the hushed phone calls, Marta's silent tears at night. They didn't have the strength to be fully open with them. But Sophia, now 10, understood more than they thought. She knew her grandmother was once more in trouble. One afternoon, as the adults talked in the living room, Sophia went to her own room, pulled out a page from her school notebook, folded it carefully, and began writing in her tight, shaky handwriting. "Mr. Judge, my name is Sophia Ramirez. I'm 10 years old. I'm an American citizen. My grandma's name is Teresa. She's not a bad person. She never stole, never hurt anyone. She takes care of me since I was born. She makes soup when I'm sick. She sings to me at night. She tells me I'm strong. If you send her away again, I'll be sad forever. I don't want to grow up without her. Please let her stay. Don't take my Mama Teresa away from me. Sincerely, Sophia." She hid that letter among the lawyer's legal documents. Marta didn't know about it until he showed her tearfully, asking, "Can we submit this?" Maybe it changes nothing, but sometimes a handwritten heart goes farther than 1,000 documents. They did submit it as a humanitarian addendum to the deportation suspension request, a shot in the dark, a desperate plea in a system that rarely listened anymore. Teresa, in her cell, knew nothing yet. But that letter was on its way, faxed, emailed, printed, riding through legal channels the same way real love travels. No passport, no border. Other detainees noticed something different about Teresa. Despite her physical pain, a part of her still glowed. Each night, eyes closed, she murmured her grandkids' names like sacred prayers. Sofia, Mateo, Camila, Andres, Luisito, Valeria. She didn't know that hundreds of miles away, a 10-year-old had just set something bigger in motion, something no government, law, or border could easily stop. The day of the hearing dawned gray. In the Texas sky, a heavy fog blanketed the streets like an unspoken warning. Teresa, pale and shackled hands and feet, was loaded into a secure van bound for a small immigration court inside the detention facility, a white-walled room without windows, where harsh decisions were made quietly, without spectators. She wore the same beige uniform as the days before, hair in a tight braid, plastic shoes that hurt with every step. The guard escorting her barely looked at her. To him, she was just another file, a statistic, a name on that day's docket. But Teresa wasn't a statistic. She was a grandmother, and that day the whole world would remember. The assigned judge was an older man, stern with thick glasses, known for strictly following the letter of the law. His record showed hardly any rulings favoring repeat entrant immigrants. Teresa's lawyer knew it. Marta knew it. Even Teresa sensed it. Present in the room were 2 Homeland Security officials, an interpreter, her defense attorney, and a court clerk. No one else. Teresa's family couldn't attend, living thousands of miles away, lacking resources to travel. But their voices were there, on paper, in black and white, imprinted with hope. Her lawyer stood, anxious. In hand, a packet of documents, but he held out only one. A piece of lined paper, pencil written, with eraser smudges and dried tear stains. "Your Honor," he began respectfully, eyes on the judge, "I'm aware my client's migration history complicates matters. She is a repeat offender who re-entered illegally, and the law is explicit. But I also know there's room, albeit narrow, for humanitarian judgment. I want to present this letter from her 10-year-old granddaughter, a U.S. citizen." The judge nodded impassively. Clearing his throat, the lawyer read aloud, "My grandma taught me to love, to care, and to fight. She makes me breakfast when my mom's at work. She sings songs from El Salvador. She hugs me when I'm scared. Without her, my home is empty. Everything feels sad. I can't laugh the same. She's not a criminal. She's my heart. Please, let her come back to me. Don't take my Mama Teresa away again." Silence wrapped the room. The judge lowered his gaze slowly. The ICE officers shifted in their seats. One stopped taking notes. Nobody spoke. Nobody breathed. Teresa, at the defense table, only half understood the English, but she recognized the essence. She knew that was Sophia's voice. Even if she couldn't grasp every word, the lawyer's trembling tone and everyone's reaction told her her granddaughter was speaking for her. Tears started running down her face. She couldn't wipe them. Her hands were cuffed. She dropped her head, weeping quietly, without drama, but weighed by all the heartbreak she'd endured. The judge raised a hand in a signal for silence. He closed his eyes briefly, inhaled deeply, then looked at the lawyer and at Teresa. "Mrs. Ramirez," he said, now sounding more humane, "this court can't ignore the gravity of your immigration history, but neither can it dismiss the obvious impact your absence has on U.S. citizen minors." The lawyer stood, waiting. Teresa didn't move. The officers seemed tense. "I'm going to review this letter further and consult with the humanitarian office," the judge went on. "I'm suspending this hearing for now. I won't make a final decision today." And that was it. He stood up and left through a back door. The lawyer exhaled, like he'd been holding his breath for hours. Teresa kept crying. No one in the room tried comforting or warning her, because, in some way, they all realized something had shifted. That letter, penned by a 10-year-old, had done what no one expected. Humanized a grandmother the system had seen merely as an infraction, shaking up a building built of cold laws, planting doubt where once there was only bureaucratic certainty. That evening, back in her cell, Teresa repeated the words she'd understood: love, care, fight, like a mantra, like a rope binding her to hope. For the first time in ages, she slept unafraid. 14 days passed after the hearing, 14 days of anguish for everyone. In Los Angeles, Marta couldn't sleep. Julio checked his phone every 10 minutes. The children, not fully grasping it, felt the heavy silence saturating the house. Sophia, though, didn't ask. She just waited, confident deep inside that her letter had reached its target. Meanwhile, Teresa remained in custody, her health steadily worsening. Her cough was chronic, her bones ached, and her legs could barely hold her. On some nights, she wondered if she would ever get out alive. Then she'd recall that letter, her granddaughter's words echoing in her mind like a prayer. "Without her, my home is empty." That was enough to keep going. One morning, a facility lawyer summoned Teresa. She figured it was just more paperwork. They seated her at a desk, offered her water, and in front of her sat her attorney, wearing an expression entirely changed. "Mrs. Ramirez," he began quietly, "I have news." Teresa straightened up. She said nothing. "The judge re-reviewed your case. He took into account your documents, medical condition, and the letter, especially your granddaughter's letter." She watched him without blinking, her heart hammering in her chest. "He's decided to suspend your deportation indefinitely under a humanitarian clause." She didn't understand right away. Suspend, indefinite, humanitarian clause, all official terms. But the lawyer leaned in, his eyes moist. "They're not deporting you. You can stay. With your family, you'll be monitored, yes, but you get to stay." Teresa said nothing, only closed her eyes. For a second she thought she was dreaming. Her lips trembled, tears poured freely. She wanted to cover her face, but her hands were still cuffed. The lawyer was moved as well, explaining that the judge had invoked exceptional humanitarian circumstances, an extreme rarity under the Trump administration's zero-tolerance approach. Yet, in this instance, the judge listed 4 factors impossible to ignore: deep family ties, especially with U.S. citizen minors, her delicate health and advanced age, no criminal record, severe emotional harm to her grandchildren if she was gone. "This isn't asylum or permanent residency," the lawyer clarified, "but it's permission to remain on humanitarian grounds with supervision. You'll wear an ankle monitor, Have to check in monthly. Can't leave the state, but you'll be free with them." Teresa nodded slowly. She needed nothing more. True freedom wasn't simply being out in the world. For her, it meant going home, seeing them again, touching them, hearing their voices not filtered through a phone, breathing the same air. 2 days later, they released her. Exiting the detention center, she wore the same uniform, carried a bag of meager belongings and an electronic monitor strapped to her ankle, heavy more for its symbolism than its weight. Her attorney personally drove her to the airport so she could fly back to Los Angeles with special authorization. On the ride, she didn't speak, just stared out the window. The sky, the trees, the road signs all seemed more vivid, more real, as if seeing them for the first time. She flew alone, discreetly escorted, and upon landing in Los Angeles, Marta was waiting. They hugged wordlessly. No words existed for that moment, only the knot in their throats. They gazed at each other, touching faces as though to confirm it was real. At home, the kids rushed her again in unison. They didn't expect her that day. They shrieked her name as though normalcy returned. Valeria clung to her. Camilla showed her a drawing. Luisito offered a scribbled doodle. Mateo gave her a long hug. Sophia just looked her in the eye and smiled. No need to speak. Teresa, now with an ankle monitor and monthly reporting obligations, felt freer than ever. For the first time, the system acknowledged what she'd always known. She wasn't a threat or a statistic, but a grandmother. And that, finally, was enough. Since returning, Teresa Ramirez woke up each day before dawn as always. Her body ached, her steps were slow, yet routine gave her purpose. Some tasks were now beyond her, climbing stairs quickly, picking up smaller grandkids, walking more than a couple blocks without a break. But it didn't matter. She was home, and that changed everything. On her right ankle, the blinking red light of the electronic device served as a reminder. The authorities fitted it as part of her supervised release. Each time she moved, it gave a faint buzz that had become part of the household's background noise. Initially, the kids asked what it was. She smiled. "It's my ticket back, the price I paid to be here with you." Despite it, her grandchildren never pitied her. They saw her as a hero. Sophia, now 11, would say every night, "Thank you for not giving up, Grandma. If you hadn't fought, I wouldn't learn how to fight either." They each showed their love in different ways. Camilla left her drawings under her pillow. Mateo fixed the chairs without being asked. Andres cooked tortillas for her, even if he burnt them. Luisito startled her with surprise hugs. Valeria brought her favorite toys, ones she wouldn't share with anyone else. And Sophia went with her to check in monthly, holding her hand while they waited, sitting by her side as though they shared a secret only they could understand. Marta and Julio worked more confidently now, not only because Teresa was alive and home, but because that small house, despite its modest size, felt complete again. Teresa hardly mentioned her time in detention or crossing the desert. She spoke only what was needed, only when the grandchildren asked. There was something in her look nobody forgot, a blend of deep pain and peace, like someone who'd walked through hell and come back. One day, while Teresa and Marta sipped coffee in the kitchen, Marta asked, "Do you regret coming back?" Teresa stared at her a moment, tears glimmering. "I regret not returning sooner. The only thing that hurts me is the lost time." Days went by, and the kids began attending school assemblies about migration, identity, belonging. Teachers assigned them projects on their families. Sophia wrote something her teacher pinned on the classroom wall. "My grandma crossed the border 3 times. Not for adventure, not for money. She did it for love. Love for us. Because a house without a grandma isn't a home. Because she's the root that never breaks, even if someone tries to tear it out." The teacher moved, called Marta for permission to share that piece at a literature fair. Marta agreed. A week later, Teresa read it aloud, her voice cracking toward the end. "A house without a grandma isn't a home," she repeated silently, pressing the paper to her chest. Monthly visits to immigration became routine. She always arrived early with her file of paperwork, her prescription list, that anxious smile. The officer assigned to her case, a young, serious but courteous woman, treated her respectfully. On one occasion, while updating Teresa's info, she said, "Few people accomplish what you have. Sometimes the system also needs reminding why we started working here in the first place." Teresa said nothing, just nodded. She knew those words were more than small talk. They were a sign. Each day, stepping outside, she knew her freedom hung by a thread, but no longer feared it. She'd realized something no document could convey, that no law could contain. The love her grandkids gave her was stronger than any border. On a Friday afternoon, cooking with Sophia, she uttered words she'd repeat for years to come, a phrase that etched itself in the family's memory like a quiet hymn of resilience. "They took me away 3 times, but a little girl was the one who brought me back. Love is the only document that can't be torn up." And so, through tears, raids, ankle monitors, and hugs, Teresa Ramirez went back to being who she had always been, the heart of her home. If you enjoyed this story, you'll surely love the next one on your screen. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, and turn on notifications. See you next time.